Welcome to the Roy Morgan Weekly Update. This week, government confidence and consumer confidence are both down, and inflation expectations are up for a second week in a row. And we're finally within sight of the federal election being held this Saturday. Poll watchers have asked for more detail, so we're looking at voting intention in more detail this week, as minor party preferences are going to decide who wins in many seats. The latest Roy Morgan poll shows the race tightening, although the ALP is still in pole position. ALP on 53% on a two-party preferred basis is down 2.5% from a week ago, ahead of the LNP coalition on 47%. This is pretty much back to the two-party preferred lead for the government in late March, when Prime Minister Anthony Albanese called the election. Since early voting opened last week, over 3 million Australians have already voted, representing around 20% of the electorate. If the federal election had been held last weekend, the Albanese ALP government would have been returned with a slightly increased majority. However, since then, we've had the final leaders debate, and we all know a week's a long time in politics. And there are still many undecided voters out there, including 5.5% in this week's survey, who can't say who they'll vote for, and around a third of the electorate plan to vote for a minor party or an independent. Of course, in many seats, the parties or candidates these people would like to vote for may not be standing, or they may not be handing out how to vote cards, and this introduces further uncertainty regarding who they'll vote for, which major party they'll send their preferences to, and even whether some of them may not vote at all. So although Labor appears well on top with only a week to go, there are still many uncertainties that could heavily impact these results over the closing few days of the campaign. On Sunday night, Channel 7 hosted the final leaders' debate between Albanese and opposition leader Peter Dutton. Roy Morgan provided the studio audience of undecided voters to assess both leaders on key questions. The results were conclusively in favour of Prime Minister Albanese, who won on 5 out of 6 questions and overall. Importantly, the Prime Minister's biggest win was on the cost of living. 65% of the undecided voters agreed with Albanese, compared to only 16% for Dutton. Albanese also won easily in what they call the hot takes section. Albanese 50%, Dutton 14%. And the section on tax cuts. Albanese 49% to Dutton 21%. There was also a narrow victory for Albanese on housing, on 35% compared to Dutton on 30%. While opposition leader Peter Dutton performed well on 2 issues, winning on the issue of defence, Dutton 43%, just ahead of Albanese on 37%, and a clear win on Indigenous affairs, Dutton on 46% compared to Albanese on 27%. Dutton's clear win on Indigenous affairs recalls the opposition leader's successful campaign against the Indigenous voice to Parliament in 2023. Overall, though, the verdict was clear. Albanese easily won the debate, attracting 50% support of the undecided voters, compared to only 25% who said Dutton won the debate, and a further 25% of the audience who were still undecided. The strong result for Prime Minister Albanese in Sunday's Channel 7 debate augurs well for the government as we head towards Election Day on Saturday. Now, coming back to dissect the latest Roy Morgan voting intention data. Despite the two-party preferred swing back to the coalition, primary support for the major parties was little changed this week, with the coalition on 34.5%, up just 0.5%, and now just ahead of the ALP on 34%, down 0.5%. The real movement was in the minor parties. Primary support for the ALP is strongest in South Australia at 39% and Victoria at 37%, and among Australians aged 50 to 64, 36%. For the coalition, primary support is strongest in Queensland, 39%, and Western Australia, 37.5%, and is far higher for Australians aged 65 and over at 49.5%, much higher than any other age group. Looking now to the minor parties, support for the Greens dropped 1.5% to 13%, while support for One Nation increased 1.5% to 7.5%. Now, this is not a direct transfer of voting intention, but it indicates movement between the two major parties and the two key minor parties of the left, being the Greens, and the right, One Nation. Greens support is highest in South Australia, 15.5%, and Western Australia, 14.5%, and Victoria, 14%. Only in Victoria does the party hold lower house seats. And support for the Greens is clearly highest among younger Australians at 33.5% among 18 to 24-year-olds and 24.5% for people aged 25 to 34. One Nation has its highest levels of support in New South Wales, 11%, South Australia, 8.5%, Tasmania, 8%, and Queensland, 7%. One Nation is challenging for Senate seats in all 4 of these states. Now, in terms of age groups, it's the 35 to 49-year-olds at 11% and younger Australians aged 18 to 24 at 9% who provide One Nation's strongest support. A further 11% of electors are opting to support other minor parties and independents. That's unchanged on a week ago. And within that block of support, the largest support is for so-called teal independents at 2% and Clive Palmer's Trumpet of Patriots at 1.5%. These results take into account that minor parties and independents are not running in every seat. Now, this week's government confidence, whether people think the country's going in the right direction or the wrong direction, dropped 4.5 points to 81.5 and remains well below the neutral level of 100. Now the majority of Australians, 52.5%, say the country's going in the wrong direction, up 4.5% in just a week. Only 34%, unchanged, say that the country's going in the right direction. In more concerning news, ANZ Roy Morgan consumer confidence fell 2.1 points to 83.4, now at its lowest so far this year. Concerns about personal finances over the next 12 months drove the fall, with only 26% of respondents saying they expect to be better off financially this time next year. That's the lowest figure for this indicator for 5 years, since April 2020. And inflation expectations increased, up 0.2% to 5.1% this week. That means Australians now expect inflation of 5.1% over each of the next 2 years. This is the highest rate since mid-January. Thanks for your interest in Roy Morgan's latest results as we head towards this week's federal election. Roy Morgan will be interviewing Australians each night, so watch out for our latest results.